Hey everybody, my name is Brad. I'm one of the pastors here at Copper Hills, and I'm glad to welcome you here. I want to especially welcome our friends and family at home. I had a thought this last week that made me chuckle, and I'll tell you what it is, and I don't know if you'll chuckle, but I thought it was funny. I sometimes laugh at my own stuff when no one else really does. I thought back to my childhood. I grew up in the romper room area. Any of you grow up in the romper room area know that? You know about that. In fact, yes, there's applause for that too. So, in fact, two of my children were on the show Romper Room, and I remember at the end of the show, Miss Fran would pull out this magic mirror. Remember that? Except it was just a hand mirror with no mirror or glass in it. And she would look through it and go, I see Johnny and Billy and Susie and Timmy. And kids would actually send their names in, so she would say their name. So when I talk to the camera and saying hi to our friends at home, I see Dick and Val and Steve and Kathy and Joy and Judy. And it's just like, I feel like Miss Fran. It's a really special moment for me. It's nostalgic, right? Like I said, I smile at my own stuff, right? Before I start, I want to remind you of some really cool things. We are going to take a run at doing some Christmas Eve services. And oddly enough, they're on Christmas Eve and Christmas Eve. The one on Christmas Eve, that's Wednesday, is at 7. And then we're going to do three on Christmas Eve, one at 2, 3:30, and 5. Now, that's our plan. And we're determined to go through with it. We're going to have to be creative to create some space, right? To be conscientious and careful and wise. And so for those services only, we're asking people whether you'd be so kind as to let us know how many of you are coming, to make sure that we have enough space and room to fit everybody in. So if you can go to our website and reserve your spot, that's just going to help us all out a little bit. Then secondly, Pastor Paul was telling us last weekend about something really cool that's happening starting on New Year's Day midnight. We as a church family all together here on the campus in the mini-odd are going to read through the entire scriptures together, one at a time in 10-minute slots. We had a ton of people sign up last week to be part of it, and we're thrilled with where we're at. There are still some more spots Saturday and some on Sunday especially, so Paul and a gang of volunteers are going to be out in the lobby, and they'll sign you up for it. Now, if you're at home, you're wondering how can we participate with that, just send an email to chc@copperhills.org, and we'll be in touch with you and figure out a time slot for you, your friends, your family, your clan, however you want to do that. But that's a really cool thing that we're going to do together to start the new year off, reading through the scriptures together. What could be better than that, right? All right, so now we're in week 3 of preparing our minds and our souls for the annual celebration of the launch of the most significant 3-year event that has ever happened on the face of the earth in all of human history. And we know what it is. We call it Christmas, but it was our intent with these 3 or 4 weeks leading up to Christmas that we could kind of be sidetracked from not only the events of this very unique Christmas, but also maybe from the cultural trappings that we all can get sucked into so easily. So we said, let's together for 4 weeks talk together not about the event, as significant as it is. You cannot overstate how big a deal it is for humanity, but to talk about the who that created the whole event. And this is what he tells us about. He said, I came to be with you. And that's what we've been looking at these last 3 weeks, and we will all the way through Christmas. We all know the story. Don't need to be reminded of the story. A teenage girl finds out she's pregnant, never had sex with a guy. Fiance Joseph finds out about it. He's hard done by that, understandably, and is going to call the whole thing off. And then an angel shows up to both Mary and to Joseph, kind of talks them out of it because he says there's a bigger plan here. I know it all is a little odd and it's overwhelming for you and you don't know exactly how to respond, and there's some intuition you have here. You think you should do a certain thing, but don't do that. Do this instead, because it's all part of God's grand plan. And they believe the angel. They actually go with whatever the angel says. So they take this 4-day road trip down to a little town south of Jerusalem, and there she has a little baby boy. and it all starts. And it's really a profound story. Like you have to actually stop and think through it slowly and go, it's just amazing what this young couple did. It's like being visited by an angel is a big deal, right? Anybody experienced that? That's what I thought. Me either. So it's pretty convincing. But still, what they were asked, what they had been promised. In fact, at one point, the angel, and this is what we've been looking at, turns to Mary and Joseph. Joseph, first of all, and I'm sure Mary heard about it. He says there's a promise from 735 years ago that's about to happen. Matthew 1:23 says, this is what the angel is quoted as saying, look, the virgin will conceive a child. That virgin, turns out, it's Mary. She'll give birth to a son, and they'll call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And that's where we've taken these last weeks from, and we're going to the weeks ahead. I highlighted the name Emmanuel, God with us, because somehow God was able, and this is mysterious and amazing, somehow able to take his godness and compress it into the body of an 8-pound, 6-ounce baby. How did he do that without losing his godness? It's amazing. It's the most amazing experience in human history. It's so significant, in fact, that 3 of the 4 eyewitnesses to Jesus' life talk about that experience, though they weren't there. They would have had to learn about it down the road. We just read from Matthew as one. We know that Luke does some serious research, and he writes a really extensive report of how this all came about. Peter, through Mark's words, the Gospel of Mark, actually doesn't deal with it. I think, Peter's a little sensitive to stuff, right? And I just think he goes, it's such a girl thing to have a baby. I'm not going to, I'm a dude, I'm a man, I'm not talking about babies being born. I think he just leaves it out for that reason. I don't know that, but we'll ask him one day. Now, John, that's the 4th one, he also records it, but he's got nothing to say about mangers and stars and wise men and all of that stuff. He doesn't. He takes a totally different tack. This is how John tells us about this event. John 1:1-2, we read this last week. It says, in the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. We looked at what the word means last week. You can check our website out if you want to get a bit of a story of how that word develops into referring to Jesus. There's a whole background to that. But this is Jesus, who was with God, was God, and then he came to be with us. I want to take you to some other verses a little further. Intervening verses talk about John the Baptist and how he came and said that Jesus was the Son of God, and some people believed that and went with that and became followers of Jesus. He invited a dozen guys to be his apostles, apprentices, disciples, and they walked with him, John being one of those. And in John, verse 14 of that same chapter, gets to this. This is his rendition of the Nativity Scene. Verse 14 says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Or literally, he pitched his tent with us. He moved into the neighborhood, is how Eugene Peterson says it. It's like the writer, the author of a blockbuster movie, writing himself into the story as the main character, but nobody knows he's the main character, or an artist painting himself into a portrait, but you can't recognize him as the artist. It's a really amazing thing that the God of all creation paints himself into the human story, but that's what he does. And John goes on to say he made his dwelling among us. Now, he's not necessarily referring to you and me 2,000 years later, though we get to be part of it. He's really referring to his 12 guys. John's saying we saw it. We were there. We were part of it. We were present. We, next verse, me, myself, and the guys have seen his glory. We saw the wonder of who Jesus was, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John the Baptist testifies concerning him. He cries out saying, this was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. Through Moses, God's grace, he talks about the law coming through Moses, and then the grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now, here's what I want to do with you today for just a little bit. I want to think through, again, not the what of Christmas, but the who of Christmas and who it is that comes. I find it so interesting that when John reflects on his 3 years with Jesus, he narrows down 2 qualities of Jesus that stand out for him, that are unique, they're different. He's going to stop for just a second. Imagine this. You have the chance to interview John, the Apostle John, and you go, John, okay, so you hung out with Jesus for 3 years. You walked together. You saw him do amazing things. You saw him heal people and cast out demons and teach these incredible lessons of moral truth and spiritual truth and all. John, just take a second and give us one word that describes Jesus. Those 3 years, okay, 2. You get 2 words. Describe Jesus. What are the 2 words that John's going to use? Well, these are the 2 words I want to think about with you, because this is who came into this world to be these 2 things, and it turns out this is exactly what he is. In verse 14, we read it the first time. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And then in verse 17, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. If you want to understand what Jesus taught, see and take a look at what Jesus did. That'll explain what it is that he taught. So John obviously didn't just hear Jesus say, I am grace and truth. No, John's saying he did teach that, but he was that. I saw what grace and truth looked like. I'm sure there were many other qualities that Jesus possessed that John could have thought of, but these are the ones that he picks out. Now, why would those stand out? Could it be that it is something really odd to see someone who's full of grace and truth? Here's what's not odd: to see someone who's full of grace or to see someone who's full of truth. It's extraordinarily odd to see someone who's full of both at the same time, together. We tend to either be grace people or truth people. We lean one way or the other. We tend to bend to grace or we tend to bend to truth. And in the end, we tend to bend significantly and consistently to one or the other. I want to try to show you something today that might help explain this. I want to describe for you grace people and truth people. When you think about someone who is a grace person, you can think along these lines. This is someone that's pleasant to be around. They're very accepting of you. They don't ruffle feathers. They give us a lot of slack. They put up with a lot of stuff from us. They tend to be easygoing. They accept us for who we are. They don't make many demands of us. They're welcoming. You know, you're okay. You're all right. They seldom correct us, and maybe almost never are disappointed with us or let us ever know. But here's the thing. Grace without truth, or a truth-challenged person, will leave us wondering if they really stand for anything, if they really have any convictions, or if they like us or they're just trying to be liked by us. Sometimes they appear cowardly or soft, they're tolerant, and we wonder whether they really have any core convictions and principles to live by. They seem to avoid making tough decisions because it seems they just don't want to disappoint anybody. They demand nothing of others and they get nothing in return. They accept us for who we are, but we're never, ever really sure whether they should accept everything about us. This is a grace person. On the other hand, a truth person, well, they're easy to admire because they have clear principles and convictions. They clearly know that we're all accountable to somebody or something, and they're happy to hold us accountable to something or somebody. They have convictions and principles. They believe in right and wrong. They eagerly speak out against what they see as injustice, oppression. They're not shy to tell you when you have messed up and when you're wrong. They often are the ones who set a standard for group behavior. But again, if you are just a truth person, and that is the center part of who you are, and you're grace challenged, you're loyal to your cause and to your view, but sometimes people wonder whether you're loyal to us. A truth person is someone that will help us change or change us for the better, but we don't know if they do that because they love us or they just want us to conform. A truth person is quick to assess and cast judgment on others and kind of ends up feeling like condemnation in some ways. They're able to make difficult decisions, but often without concern that the difficulty their decision is making is difficulty that is created for others. They can be slow to forgive. Grew up with a boss that said, "To err is human, to forgive is not company policy." And he lived it. He did. They inspire us with their courage, but grate on us with their intimidation and demands of conformity. So, if you're a grace person, you're probably most concerned about the other person and their well-being and whether they feel loved and accepted. If you're a truth person, you tend to be not so much concerned about that, but are they living the truth? Are they living well within that? So let's move and take that from theory to our own lives for just a second. Let's make it personal. Think of a relationship or an example, an experience that you're living in today where you live around someone who tends to be more of a grace person or tends to be more of a truth person. What's it like living in that? Well, it depends whether you're a grace person or a truth person. Some of us will have grown up in families where we had a parent who was grace-oriented and another parent who was truth-oriented. You loved the grace parent, right? Because they were tolerant and they let us get away with stuff and easily forgiven, and truth parent was all over us. They had expectation and demands and curfews and responsibility and accountability. Think of a boss, maybe a coach, a sibling, or maybe a spouse even. Have you got someone? Have you got a situation? Because you want to apply it, what Jesus teaches, to that situation. Or think of it this way. A few weeks ago, I was over at the Well Coffee Shop, ordered myself a delicious cup of coffee, and I decided to not drink it in the coffee shop, but to go to my office with it, and I also decided not to put a lid on it. So as I'm getting out of the coffee shop, I'm opening the door with my back, and I walk out and I bump into someone. Guess what spilled out of the coffee cup? This is not rocket science. Coffee spilled out of it. So another way to look at this is when someone bumps up against you, what spills out of your life? Is it grace or is it truth? See, when someone pushes on us, when we're in a difficult setting, here's the truth of us human beings, at least if you're like me. I love it when people are gracious to me, and I love being truth in someone else's life. You too? Isn't that us? We love to receive grace, and we love to give truth. And I wonder if this is why John says, when I hung out for Jesus with him for 3 years, I saw him get bumped all the time. And what I saw spill out of his life was not a balance of grace and truth. He was those things together at the same time. He had this beautiful spirit of being gracious and truthful together, and being truthful and gracious like all the time. I never saw him just be one at the expense of other. He's just he was different than anybody I'd ever seen. And so when I think about him, he's full of grace and he's full of truth. It's putting these two together. And not just a little bit. It becomes something new, entirely new. Right to the brim. Full up. You can count on it. You can predict it. This is how Jesus was. It's so remarkable to look at his life. There's a story that we tell around here a lot. It's a story of Jesus on his way from Jerusalem to the northern part of the country, and he goes through Samaria, which was like enemy territory, if you will. He gets to a well, and he meets a woman there. And they're having this chat, and Jesus is thirsty, and he speaks with her, which would have been totally uncommon for a man to speak to her, for a Jew to speak to a Samaritan. But Jesus does that because it's full of grace, right? And they have the conversation, and he says, would you get me something to drink? And she gets him something to drink, and then Jesus does this. Oh, Jesus, how could you do this? You ask her about her husband, and you know that's a sensitive subject for her. You know she has a history of brokenness in that area, and still you asked her about it, and she goes, yeah, I don't have a husband. And then you step right into the middle of it, like, yeah, it's true, but did you have to go there? He says, yeah, you've had 5. And they've either all died or you've been divorced from them, and it's a bit of a mess and a hurtful thing in your life. And I know the guy you're living with today is not your husband. Like, well, a little grace, Jesus. Like, that's true, but do you have to point it out? Oh, and then he turns to her and says to her something he had never said to anybody else as long as he had lived to that point. He turns to her and says, you know something? You're eyeball to eyeball right now with the Messiah that the world's been waiting for. And you're the first person I'm telling that to. And I'm telling you that there is a possibility for your soul to be filled with a fullness that you'll never find in a guy. You'll never find it in a guy. And I'm offering that to you right now. Now, where was he gracious? Where was he truthful? You can't differentiate. He's those things all together. He's at the same time in everything that he lives, he does. No wonder it's so remarkable for John. Just 4 chapters later, that's from John 4, John 8, we read this story of Jesus teaching in the temple court. And as he's teaching, these religious guys come along and drag this woman who's been caught in adultery, and out in the public in front of everybody, they tell the whole sordid affair. Now, how did they know she had been caught in that? Who knows? Maybe they had their own hookup with her. Like, who knows, right? But that doesn't matter. It's her, and she's got the problem. And they're gonna sort Jesus out on some things. And they say, Jesus, you know the law. Like, you're all about truth. You know Moses' law, the 10 Commandments, and the 600 other things that we've added to it along the way. You know all about that. And you know that it says that she should be stoned because she was caught in adultery. What do you have to say to that, Jesus? And of course, Jesus, because he's all grace, comes along, guys, don't talk like that. You're embarrassing her right in front of everybody. You don't. Like, go take it off someplace and, like, have a little grace toward her. He actually doesn't say that. He doesn't also say, yeah, it's true. But he almost leans that way when he says, okay, let's take it at that. And here's what we're going to do. First, run around this little circle here who has never lusted in their heart, never committed adultery in their mind, never had those images and those visions in your heart. You go ahead and get to throw the first stone. Go for it. And of course, they all drop their rocks and they leave. And it's just Jesus and her now. And what does he say to her? He says, I guess nobody condemns you. And I don't either. But I want you to know, you got to leave the life of sin. You got to. Not because you're going to be condemned, because I don't condemn you. That's been taken care of. But because it's not good for your soul, it's not good for your life. I want to do something in you that you don't ever have to try to find fulfillment there again. Full of grace, full of truth, all at the same time. Isn't it remarkable? I would hope it would create envy in all of us. That we would go, I want to be like that. I want to see the world like that. Because, like, honestly, I lean toward grace and I overlook a bunch of stuff and I let people, I enable people. Because I think grace is going to somehow change them. Or I'm way over here on the truth side and I don't have many friends left because I'm so truthful. And Jesus didn't do that. Together, all at the same time, in an amazing way. No wonder it stands out for John. And then you take Jesus to the final moments of his life. He's hanging on a cross. 3 men all going to die. And one guy turns to Jesus and he says, hey, Jesus has nothing to die for. We do, but he has nothing to die for. To which Jesus says, dude, you're right. You're messed up, man. Like, you're here. Like, you did terrible things in your life. Do you know that the Roman Empire did not crucify people for thievery? But that's what the Bible says they were there. So something else happened. They were either serial thieves, or maybe they killed someone along the way as they were robbing them. We don't know, but like, there's a legit crime of why they're hanging there. You had to in the Roman Empire. Typically, if you stole something, you ended up being an oarsman on Caesar's ships, or you would go serve in the mines, whatever it would be. And Jesus turns to one of them and says, you're going to be with me in paradise. Just hold on a couple of minutes, and we'll go share the presence of the God of the universe in just a couple of minutes. What? Where's the confession? Where's the, would you take me to paradise? Where's the, why are you hanging here on the cross, Jesus? Oh, you're hanging here for the sins of the world. Would you include mine in that? Would that take effect in mine? There's none of that. It's just, you'll be with me in paradise. He doesn't deny the guy deserves to be there, but he's filled with grace, both at the same time, together. Well, hold on just a second. Just a few chapters earlier, we read about a rich guy coming to Jesus, falling on his knees in front of Jesus and going, what do I have to do to partake in eternal life? Like, what's the formula, Jesus? And Jesus turns to him and says, today you'll be with me in paradise. No, he doesn't. He says, why don't you go sell everything you have, get rid of all of it, live a life of modesty, and come and be my apprentice. And, we'll live together. It's too much for the guy. So what is it? No confession, you're with me in paradise? I want to have eternal life. Yeah, go do all these things to get there. Like, what is it? You see, that's the tension between grace and truth when you live them together. If you're just a truth person, there's not much tension other than the tension your truth creates. And if you're grace-filled, there's not much tension there except the disquiet it has in your soul later in the evening when you just gave in again. But when you're going to live with truth and grace together, there's tension in it. It's hard to figure out, and you and I don't get it just right, like Jesus got it right. But this is who came into our world. This is God with us, living here, living out grace and truth. And no wonder it's so remarkable for John, so remarkable for him, that he says, when I think about being with Jesus those 3 years, I just think about he was so different from anybody and filled with grace and truth. This is a world that so needs followers of Jesus to be full of grace and truth. Here's typically what happens for us as human beings when we're in a world of fear and chaos and uncertainty like we are. You know which way we drift? We drift over here. That's where we drift. And then we become demanding, and we want to have like the 10 Commandments recited, and because if I follow those, that's at least some stability in my life, that's some predictability, that's truth. And then we start comparing things to that, or we get all messed up with the truth of masks or no masks, or vaccine or no vaccine, and we just land on the truth. But when we're hurt, when we've messed something up, we don't want truth. We want grace. And we're torn between these things as human beings. And Jesus comes along. And he says, can I give you some truth and grace at the same time? If you want to understand what Jesus teaches, watch what Jesus does. When he says that there's a new way we're to do life, and that's to love one another, and you want to know what love one another looks like and what he means by that, just watch what he does. Here's how he loves one another. He's full of grace and truth all the time. He'll turn to you and me and say, you know something? Every single person has had a season in their life, and maybe it's your season right now, where you're living independent of me. That's truth. where I really am not part of your decisions. You determine your own sexual expression. You're in a relationship with someone living together and you're not married. Your business ethics, if anybody knew what you were doing, would cringe at the very least. What you do with your money, you're making the call on that. I'm not really involved in that. Your body health, you put into you and you consume whatever you want and you're not healthy and you don't exercise and I'm not even brought into that. That's uncomfortable truth, right? And then he'll say that independent living, there's a name for it. It's called sin. Sin. And if that's who you are, I want you to know I paid for it. I took care of that. That's grace. Full of grace and full of truth. And because I paid for it, I don't condemn you. And even if you don't trust me on that and lean in with me on that, and even if you still live independently, away from me and don't let me be part of your decisions, I still love you. I love you. That independent living doesn't work, but I love you. And I love you this much, that if you live your whole life living independently of me, and you end up dying when you're living independently of me, I'm going to let you live independent of me forever. That's truth. But you don't have to, because I invited you in. I stood at the door of your heart and I knocked and I sought you out, and I'm looking for you again now. That's grace. Both of those at the same time. Isn't it marvelous? Isn't it amazing? Isn't it stunning? So, may I ask you, I'm going to anyways, where do you lean? Because we're not totally different like Jesus. We're on the road to differentness, right? As we live with him and do life with him. Do you lean more toward truth? And that's kind of your go-to. And you might even say, I go to a little more these days because I'm afraid. Would you have the courage to bring that to Jesus or maybe someone else and go, do you think I'm over on the truth side? And here's really a courageous question. How does that make you feel when that's how I deal with things? Or do you think I'm on the grace side and that I just let stuff go and I'm actually enabling people and maybe you, and I need to bring some truth into it? Jesus will help with this. There's a wonderful passage in 2 Corinthians 1:16 where Paul's trying to describe what it's like to be a follower of Jesus, and he says, but you have the mind of Christ. What's that mean? That we can think like him because his Spirit's in us, and he's driving us here, full of grace and truth. What might Christmas look like this year? Would it look different when you get together with that cantankerous family of yours? And you'd love a little truth in their lives, and you'd love some more grace from them. And what if you drew the circle around yourself and said, I, Jesus, want to live full of the kind of grace and truth that you live with me. If you want to see what Jesus means, watch what he does. Now, King Jesus, Master of grace and truth, would you be truth to us? Would we be courageous to hear it from you? You tell us that you've given us your Spirit to convict us of sin, of righteousness, and how one day it's all going to be exposed and we're going to be accountable for it. And some of us are going to hear the wonderful words of truth and grace that goes, yep, that's who you were. I paid the price. You're innocent. Oh, Jesus, teach us. Walk us deeply into the kingdom of truth and grace. and teach us as your apprentices, as your students, as your learners, to increasingly think like you, full of grace and truth. And we'll be grateful for it.